All right, we'll get started here in just a second. All right, I want to welcome everyone tonight to our League of Women Voters of Alabama Voter Education Series. And tonight we're going to talk about Alabama's municipalities and really focusing on why local elections matter. And part of this is understanding the role that municipalities, big, small, and medium size play. Is going to help us really when we start talking to people about the importance of showing up and voting this summer and for every election, but really focusing right now on municipal elections. And I need to introduce our speaker tonight. Sandy Kirkindall is a friend of mine. He is the son of two World War II Navy veterans and is a native of Orange, Texas. And he graduated from Georgia Tech with a bachelor's of aerospace engineering and a master of science in industrial management. And he served in the U.S. Army as an active duty air defense artillery officer in 1970 to 1971 and served in the Army Reserve until 1976. After completing his active military service, he worked as a structures and propulsion engineer with the Army Missile Command for 9 years, and he transferred to NASA in 1980 and worked in the structures and propulsion engineer for 8 more years. That's actually where I met him. So we go back a while. And so he transitioned into project and program management, where he worked for 16 more years before retiring to become mayor of the city of Madison. And he completed his term in 2008. And so tonight, Judy, if you'll let people in, I think everybody's in. Okay, thank you. So tonight we're gonna have a conversation about municipal elections. In just one moment, I am. All right. So Sandy, we're going to have a conversation, and then later we'll open it up to the folks on the call so that everyone can ask any questions that they have. And if you've got some slides you want to show, I guess that's vernacular that aerospace engineers or other engineers love, is slides versus charts. I don't know I don't know what other people call them, but PowerPoint. But anyway, tonight, focusing on municipal elections, when I read your biography and also some of the information that I've seen you share in the past, I was wondering, what is it that first got you interested in becoming more engaged with your town of Madison?
I was actually interested in civic affairs in Huntsville. What really piqued it was there was a rezoning proposed that was going to affect our whole neighborhood. And, I led a citizens group to try and change the zoning, and eventually decided to run for city council in Huntsville. I didn't do very well, but that kind of piqued my interest. And my interest in Madison, when we moved out here, I was still interested in city affairs, and I was asked by the current city commissioner head. Madison had a commission form of government at the time to serve on Board of Adjustments and Appeals. I liked that and went on to serve on the Planning Commission, the Utilities Board, and then as mayor. It was really interesting, and it was the chance to make a contribution to the community, which is really what I was aiming for the whole time.
Okay, sorry.
Go ahead.
You go ahead.
There was one of the things that's always kind of intrigued me is why more people don't vote in local elections. And you mentioned, trying to get people more involved. 20% turnout is good for local elections, whereas you'll get 60% turnout for a national election. And that's something that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, you may get all fired up about policy issues at the national level, but it's the local government that most directly affects your quality of life. If there are potholes on the road, you don't call the Department of Transportation. If somebody's trying to break into your house, you don't call the FBI. If the schools are not performing the way you want them to, you're not going to call the Department of Education. You are going to go down and talk to the folks at City Hall. Those are the ones that really most directly affect your quality of life. And so really, you need to be involved in your city government. Even if you don't run for office, you need to understand what's going on and be an active participant, and especially vote.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So Alabama puts a lot of tight control over what happens across the state, as far as the counties and cities across the state. And I would like for you to talk about, why is that, and what's the history there?
Well, this goes back to the 1901 Constitution, which is our current governing document. And this Constitution was put in place to cement segregation. I mean, that was really the whole idea, was to concentrate power in Montgomery and to transfer power to the central government in Montgomery and to keep all the power away from local governments, specifically to keep poor white people and blacks from voting. That was really the whole idea. The 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution says that all powers not specifically delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states and the people. And the Alabama Constitution turns that on its head. It says all powers are concentrated in Montgomery unless we specifically give certain powers to the counties or the cities. So this really kind of puts cities and especially counties in a bind. The only powers given to the county, any of the counties in the state constitution, are the power to have a probate judge and a sheriff. And for the cities, you are allowed to have those powers only that will only directly implement the city's mission, that is health and safety and whatnot. Cities' powers can be very limited. Like I said, all the power is delegated to Montgomery. And a lot of this has led to our Constitution being amended well over 900 times. And it's, I think, right now 1,100 pages long. And each one of those amendments has to be passed to give a specific power. The cities of Montgomery and Huntsville and Decatur and several others at one time were talking about implementing a occupation tax. And the state very quickly passed a constitutional amendment to prevent that. To prevent the cities from doing such a thing. And the Constitution also specifies, and this is to benefit large landowners and the powers in Montgomery, is that property taxes can only be passed by a vote of the people. And asking people to tax themselves is not very popular, obviously. And, this was a way to put most of the tax burden on non-landowners and poor folks.
Mhm.
It's kind of a shameful history, and the state has made some effort to rectify that, but we've still got a long way to go with that. And one additional thing that the Constitution does is dictate the allowable government structures that cities are allowed to have. For some reason, which I've never been able to divine, the state, using the results of the 1970 federal census, decided that cities would be classified into 8 different classifications, 1 through 8. And it was based on the population shown in the city in the 1970 census. So there is one Class 1 city, and that is Birmingham, because they have the largest population in the state. Montgomery and Mobile are Class 2 cities. Huntsville is Class 3. And Madison happens to be Class 8. We have a population of well over 50,000, close to 60,000 now. But our population at the time of the 1970 census was just below 4,000. So if you want to find out what kind of structure your city government can have, you need to go look at the Constitution. Madison can have a city manager or a commission form or a mayor council form, but there are other restrictions on us. In Madison's form of government, the council appoints the police chief and the fire chief and the city clerk. In Huntsville, as a Class 3 city, the mayor appoints the fire chief and the city clerk and the police chief. So a lot of what kind of structure you can have depends on, what the Constitution says you can have. It's not open for the citizens to decide, for themselves.
So that gets it. That makes it a lot harder when we don't have citizen-initiated ballot initiatives. I guess
that's true.
What's the interaction between the city government and the state to try to get these changes enacted?
You have to work with your city government, and the citizens have to work with your local delegation to try and get things passed. Mm-hmm. Through the legislature, if you wanted to change your form of government, if you wanted some special power that's not allowed to you in the Constitution. Some years ago, Madison County wanted to regulate, have an animal control office and regulate junkyards. There were auto junkyards showing up in various parts of the county. And they had to actually go to the state legislature to get the power to do that. So they had to work with the local delegation to allow that. But that's just for Madison County.
So when something happens, like it seems also when we look at redistricting that a lot of the influence of the larger population areas of the state is basically they've taken some of the power away from the cities through the way they've redistricted the state Senate and state House. But then I've heard the other side of the coin is they say, well, you look at all these different legislators now you get to go work with. That to me seems like I could see both sides, but I also feel like it really makes it where, the people who live in the cities, their representation is really fragmented at the state level.
It is. And that's largely a part of the legislature. It's perfectly legal to gerrymander or to restructure districts to protect someone's position. You can't discriminate on the basis of race or nationality or religion, but you can discriminate on the basis of protecting somebody's job. It's kind of odd logic, but there it is.
So when you're wanting to develop a project that's for economic development efforts, I guess you have to figure out the cities have to work with the state or the state and the county. How would that work? Could you talk a little bit about how cities work to bring, jobs and amenities to the cities?
Um, there are some restrictions. Gosh, it's changed a lot. That not all counties have the power to set up economic development commissions. That can do that kind of thing, and um, there may be some cities that require bond issues and state approval for bond issues. I really can't address that
Okay, that's
too
fair.
much.
Yeah.
Um, but one thing, the state can offer much bigger um, incentives to industries or economic development projects than cities and counties can.
When you look at the right now with all of the attacks on libraries and librarians, and I was trying to understand how is it that municipalities and counties support or control what's going on in their libraries with all the work that's all the efforts at the state level to restrict what can be put where. How do I guess as far as Huntsville Madison County Library, is that controlled, for example, is that controlled by the county or the city, or is it what, how would how could a citizen get involved in trying to protect their libraries?
Well, it depends on what the library control looks like. Um, I would be willing to bet that most cities that have a library will have a library board, um, likely appointed by the mayor or city council. And um, you know, one thing that's interesting about city government is that there are a lot of boards out there that directly affect um, things beside the city council. For example, there are beautification boards, planning commissions, boards of adjustment, which give variances to zoning laws. Um, there are library boards, school boards, and these all affect how the operation of the schools, the libraries, the landscaping efforts, how the city is zoned, how the city develops. Um, those are, in almost all cases, school boards accepted, are appointed positions. And if you want to get directly involved with stuff like library board or things like that, you need to let your local council representative or city commissioner know that you're interested and actually show up and go to the meetings.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most important sources of citizen input is to go to things like the planning commission and the city council. If the folks with a financial interest are the only ones who show up, then that's who the library board and the school board and the city council are going to respond to.
So if you're looking at the structure of this, could you talk about the structure of local government, and then, determine at each level, there's ways you can plug in, but I think it would help us to get a feel for typical structures.
Right. The most common form of city government in Alabama is the mayor council form. And that can be either a weak mayor, um, which is kind of what it is in Madison's case. Uh, and I say that weak mayor because the council controls important appointments like the fire chief and police chief. or you can have a strong mayor council form where you've got a stronger executive. And in these um, various forms, you can have different numbers of representatives, and it doesn't necessarily depend on the size of the city. For example, Huntsville has, with a population of 250,000 now, more or less, has 5 council members. Madison, with a fourth of that, has 7. Fort Payne has 9. Decatur has 5, and they're right there in the same population bracket with Madison. And the way city government works is that the mayor or city manager is the executive. Like the president of the United States, they run all the city departments. They prepare the budgets, they do all the administrative work, and essentially keep the city running. They are the CEO of the city in most cases. The council is the legislature. I always like to say in terms of, policy and budget, the mayor proposes and the council disposes. So in figuring out how the city is going to spend its money from all its various tax revenues, the mayor prepares the budget with input from all the department heads and looks at the available revenue, which is you get a forecast from your revenue department, and prepare a budget to fit within that. And under Alabama law, you have to maintain a 10% reserve so that you don't go belly up financial wise. You submit the budget to the council, and the council then decides, what they want to fund and what they don't want to fund, and how much. And the city's fiscal year always starts on October 1st and then runs to September 30th of the next year.
And so then there's the, I guess the judicial, do all cities have their own judicial system as well, or is it just certain ones or city courts?
There are city courts. Typically what the city courts handle are traffic violations, zoning violations, nuisance complaints, somebody leaving, trash all over their yard, doing things that are not allowed by city code. Those are the typical kind of things that show up in city court. And yes, cities do. I think almost every city has some form of court. It may be a part-time judge or a full-time judge, but you will have some court function. So you do have a third branch of government.
So if a group or an individual has an idea on something that they think their municipality should spend money on, how would they get that into the budget?
Well, the first thing you would need to do is to, get organized, see how popular the idea is, see if there would be significant support for it, and then start lobbying the mayor or city manager and your local council representatives, saying, hey, we think we need a playground for disabled children on this side of town. This has been a real need for a long time, and we need X number of dollars to make this happen.
So the money that's coming into where does the money come from in a city, as far as, the tax dollars are going out, but there's only a small part of that there's a small part of that stays in in the municipality. How can you talk about the flow of money as far as where most of the operating funds come from, and how that, I guess that would affect the planning cycle as far as what you
Right.
assume you get.
It depends on the various city. As I said, the Alabama Constitution makes it hard to raise property taxes. But for most cities, the biggest source of revenue is the sales tax. And the sales tax in Huntsville is roughly 60% of city revenue. In Madison, it's roughly 50%. So in Alabama, you live and die by sales tax. And the thing to keep in mind is that, for example, Madison's sales tax, the city does not keep 9%. 4% of that goes to the state, right off the top. 1.5% goes to the county, and then the remainder goes to the city, if I remember the percentages correctly. And in property taxes, the same kind of thing is true. A good bit of the property tax that's assessed and raised, a lot of it goes to the state. And so then you've got things like intergovernmental transfers, permit fees, lodging tax, beer tax, things of that nature. But sales tax and property tax are by far the biggest contributor to city revenues.
So I've heard you say that the local government is basically a school district with a fire department and a police force. Can you talk about that and what that really means as far as keeping the lights on, basically?
Right. Somebody once described the federal government as a welfare agency with an army, and cities in Alabama are very much the same. That we are, each city is more or less a school system with a public safety department, meaning police and fire. In Madison, for example, some years ago, the city had 300 employees total, and the school board had slightly over 500 employees. So the biggest chunk of money went to the school board, and then what was left over for the city, the biggest chunk of that went to the police department and fire department, simply because of the cost of the equipment, the cost of the personnel. That's where most of the money goes. So the city's budget is, for doing streets and parks and all of that, is typically 18 to 20%, maybe 25% of the total city revenue.
So is there anything else that you wanted to highlight as far as, areas that the cities, as far as people who are showing up in August for the city council and mayoral elections, is there any advice you'd have for folks who are, wondering why they should show up and vote that we haven't talked about?
Well, it kind of goes back to, what I was talking about originally, in that it's the cities that really affect your quality of life most directly. And, I don't know how else to emphasize that anymore. if you really really want to, have good schools, if you want to have good parks, if you want to have safe streets, it's the city government that's going to do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to open this up now to people in the audience, because I know they all showed up because they care about elections, and I think it would really be nice to pull on your experience. And so I want to open it up to anyone on the Zoom that wants to ask a question. Just raise your hand or come off of mute.
I have a question.
Sure.
You said that. Stephanie.
It's me. Thank you, Sandy, for being with us. Very much appreciate it.
Oh, glad to do it.
I lived I've lived in Dothan and Vestavia. And you said earlier, people need to show up at their council meetings, because if only the people with money at stake show up, then that's how the decisions tend to get made. The council meetings in some places happen during the workday. Is there any possibility of us lobbying our local commissions and councils to maybe make it more available to working people?
Sure. I mean, meetings really ought to take place after the work day. It ought to be convenient for folks to attend. If nothing else, the meetings ought to be live streamed. But scheduling council meetings for 5:30 or 6 o'clock would, is not going to impose a huge burden on the council or the mayor or department heads. That's what they ought to do. Hey, contact your local council folks. Say, hey, we want to see what's going on. We would like to have some government transparency. Make your meetings more accessible.
So just start to ask.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. All right. Anyone else? Let's get a good conversation going, because this is a small enough group that we can I think we can have a good conversation. Judy, you want to come off and ask your question?
Well, okay. What can you tell us about cities and voters? Do the districts ever change? Where do the voting lists come from? The voting machines, do y'all check them like the state does? All that kind of stuff.
As far as voting machines, in Madison County, at least, they are maintained by the county. They've got a big warehouse where they keep them. And before every election, they, test every machine. And this is something that the public can go watch. That's open to go see. In terms of, district redistricting, that's typically done every 10 years in terms of the federal census, but in very fast growing cities, it's much better to redistrict to recognize the changes in the population distribution. Madison redistricted just recently, and I switched from District 7 to District 5 simply because the west side of the city is growing so fast that, to keep the districts the more or less same population, they had to redistrict.
Okay, just sort of a jump off question on that, and this is not about Madison. This is just about just general cities in general. When Madison redistricts, how does a city actually tell its voters if their districts have changed? And one other question. I know that we used to publish the voters And now that newspapers have the list of the voter rolls, but now that newspapers have gone away, do we still do that locally? Okay.
I have not seen that. Um, I have not seen that in quite some time.
I was going to say this week when we're chasing after these GIS maps, it's been interesting because some of the folks that I've been talking to in these smaller towns, they're still right now finalizing their voting maps, their GIS maps, and which I find interesting because there's also candidate qualifying going on at the same time. But you know, I think they're trying to transition, I think, to a GIS format on all these small towns, and apparently this sounds like this year is going to be kind of a challenge. Although I guess the one woman that I talked to mentioned that they were getting ready to send out all these cards, but they were voter cards, and that's Judy. That gets back to your question because they said they were waiting to send these out until they got the maps, and so they're still finishing it. I find that I'm just kind of a little bit surprised that they're still sitting here at the end of June of 25 trying to figure their maps out.
If I could throw in one thing, because I didn't realize this until I read something the other day, that there was legislation that changed the year for municipal elections, and most
Yes.
everybody, yeah, and that maybe happened back in 2020. I don't know if it was before the census, after the census, or what. But what happens is, for a lot of cities, this is the first election they have had since 2020.
Yeah,
That's
So,
correct.
yeah.
It used to be that all state, county, and city elections were all done in presidential election years. Now, there are some cities that have staggered elections. For example, in Huntsville, the mayor and 2 council seats are up for election in 1 year, and then 2 years later, the other 3 council seats are up for election. In Madison and Decatur and a number of other cities, the mayor and all council members are all up for election or re-election at the same time. And I think the theory at the state level was that with state and county elections and primaries and city elections and primaries and runoffs, if necessary, you could be, if you were a voter and wanted to go to every, vote in every election, you could be looking at 6, 7 elections a year in a presidential election year, maybe 8. So I think what they were trying to do was to move some of the voting burden so that, the city elections would not fall the same time as the Democratic and Republican primaries and the state elections and presidential elections. So what they did was postpone city elections for 1 year so that the folks who were elected in 2020 would serve a 5-year term instead of a 4-year term. But from here on out, it's going to be a 4-year term like before. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that I remember Beryl talking about fatigue. All these, I think everybody with COVID and all the elections, but I guess I don't know what the sequence is going to be now, if they permanently shifted it a year or just
I believe that that's permanent.
Mm-hmm.
From here on out, city elections will be in 2025, 2029, 2033, and so on. Whereas state, county, and presidential elections will, of course, be 2026, 2028, and 2032, 2030, 2032, and so on. But I think your point about voter fatigue is really what they were getting at.
This is Susan. What is the disadvantage of being improperly identified in terms of the type of city that you have? Like Madison is so radically different from the census?
It's not necessarily a disadvantage. It's just that there are certain forms of government that Huntsville could have that Madison can't have, simply because of or that Birmingham could have that Madison, or for that matter, Fairhope can't have, simply because of where they were in the 1970 election, 1970 census. I would imagine Fairhope is in the same kind of situation as Madison, because 50 years ago they were a good bit smaller than they are now.
So there's no effort to change that, to update it from 1970?
There have been efforts made, but it's not an extremely pressing issue. I mean, it's just kind of some odd quirk. I have no idea why the state did that and why they don't want to reclassify it. You know, for a fast-growing city like Fairhope, you could change, you know, if they were to change it, you could go from being class 8 to class 4. You know, and there are advantages and disadvantages to each classification, I would imagine. Why they picked 1970, I have no idea.
But that would be a state law, change to state law in order to change that.
That would be a change to state law.
Mm-hmm. It just kind of shows you the tight control. I find it just absolutely astounding when you look at the amount of top level, basically chokehold on people who are living in a community to decide what they feel is the right way to go. But that's where we live.
Yeah, there was even a good bit of debate a few years back about the numbering system on the license plates before the vanity plates got popular. The leading number on the license plate signified the rank of the county by population.
Mm-hmm.
So Jefferson County with Birmingham always had leading number 1. Mobile had number 2. Montgomery had number 3. But all the rest of the cities, were alphabetized. So Madison County wound up with number 47. And when Huntsville went past Montgomery, and I believe now Mobile in terms of population, they started agitating to have the license plate prefix changed, and the state wouldn't do it.
That's like old history. They're like, don't revisit it. But
yeah.
All right. Any other questions? Any other comments?
What does the city clerk do?
The city clerk maintains all the city's records. For example, all the board minutes, planning commission, the planning commission minutes, the city council minutes, they are the repository of record for all of that. So if you want anything official, that's what the city clerk does. They are the official source for correct information. The record, all the basic record keeping that the city does goes through the city clerk's office.
So what do you want to do if you want to get appointed to one of the commissions?
Well, one thing you can do is contact the city clerk's office. They should have a list of all the boards and the positions, when positions might be available, and a list of vacancies. And they can also tell you who appoints members of the various boards. And again, this varies by city. In Madison, the mayor appoints 8 of the planning commission members and city council appoints 1. On the city gas board, the city council appoints the city's members. On the utility board, city council appoints the members. School boards are elected. In Huntsville, they're appointed in Madison by the council. So, what you need, your first step would be to contact the city clerk and find out what boards are out there, what you're interested in, and where you would like to make a contribution. Find out who appoints those folks, and then go let folks know that you're interested. It may be as simple as filling out an application. You may need to talk to your council representative or the mayor. Say, hey, I could really do a good job here. I'd like to do this.
So when you're looking at one of my pet peeves in Madison, in Huntsville, is the fact that we don't have a 24-hour pharmacy. This is in a county as big as Madison County, to not have a 24-hour pharmacy is ridiculous. And the city council says that's not their job. That's a profit. Basically, they said that's up to the drugstores, and yet it's part of public safety, in my opinion, to have a pharmacy that someone coming out of an emergency room can go get their prescription filled, or those are the kind of things to me that just seem like there's a disconnect with sometimes, at least in my city, that the city council folks don't understand that this is not just, should not be left up to capitalism to say whether or not you have a 24-hour pharmacy. And
right.
So that to me is, I just don't know what's the best. I guess the best way is go talk to them again, and maybe try to let them know that you're a voter.
Yeah, speak up in the city council meetings.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that we need.
Yeah.
The little town I grew up in, there were 3 pharmacies, and they took turns as to seeing who could stay open on Sunday. Now, they were not 24 hours, but they took turns doing that. But Huntsville, Mobile, Birmingham, even small towns, you need someplace convenient where you can get 24-hour service, and that would be something that the city could mandate as part of a business license. I imagine it would encounter resistance from the pharmacies, possibly at the state level, but that's something, where you definitely just need to put pressure on the city council.
Yeah, and you hear people who are disabled, when they're trying to find, some buildings are not accessible. And would that be contacting the ordinance, the people who control the law as far as having an accessible entrance? I mean, is that, if somebody had a concern that they felt like something was not accessible to them as maybe a mobility challenged or some other disability, that would be that's in a municipality. How do you address a concern like that? And I guess that's just another example of speaking up at your city council meetings.
And at places like planning commission, one of the things that a planning commission does, and this regardless of city size, is to enforce building codes and zoning codes. And under the Americans with Disabilities Act, you're supposed to make things accessible. So when a business comes in to a city and applies for a building permit or a zoning change, they submit plans. And one of the things that ought to be always checked is whether or not, there are the ramps on sidewalks for blind folks, with the touch pads where they enter the street, that there be accessibility for folks that are mobility challenged. That's kind of stuff needs to be enforced at the Planning Commission. And you can also talk to folks like the city engineering department. In my neighborhood, they have been retroactively modifying the sidewalks to allow for ramps down off the curb. And I'm not sure about the exact term, but trying to make our sidewalks more accessible to folks in a wheelchair or folks who are blind. And that's the kind of thing that you can get done locally without having to make an ordinance change.
Yeah, and I'm speaking from living here in Huntsville, it's like we have some major state highways that go right through the middle of town. And if there's a pothole in the middle of that road, then when you complain to your city, they say, well, that's not a city road, that's a state road. And then you're thrown into another do loop. But I guess that's still something. I guess you want your potholes filled when you're, if where you live, you want to be able to drive down the road without damaging your car.
Right. And like you said, there's the roads have different jurisdictions. State and federal highways fall under ALDOT, the Alabama Department of Transportation. And I can tell you from experience that they are difficult to deal with. They are the classic entrenched bureaucracy.
So that's why
cities and counties control, their own local roads.
Well, that's why when I ran through a pothole, then my city councilwoman told me to call the state. It's like, that's not my road. But yeah. But that's where you go and think about what, do you want that person representing you next time?
Mm-hmm.
I've got a question that just made me think about with respect to roads, but also law enforcement. I mean, I'm thinking about different jurisdictions with, different types of roads and highways or places within the city, between county sheriffs and city police officers and state police. I mean, how does somebody in a town or a city juggle all that?
Usually you have mutual assistance agreements. In Madison County, for example, we have good-sized hunks of county, unincorporated county lying within the city limits of Madison and within the city limits of Huntsville. And, Huntsville and Madison both extend into Limestone County. So what's usually done is that a city, in situations like that, will set up a mutual assistance agreement with the other entity that has jurisdiction. And, for cities that lie side by side, like Birmingham and Vestavia and Hoover and Mountain Brook, police jurisdiction is one thing, but in terms of mutual support, they try to work together as best they can. As an example, that was one of my first questions as mayor. There were several commercial establishments within the city of Madison that had never annexed or were part of the county. And I asked our fire chief, I said, what if they get a fire at one of those? He said, we take care of it, but we do this on a shared basis with the county. We're not going to watch somebody's house burn down just because they're, 10 feet away from the city limit sign.
So Jennifer Greer had a comment about there also seems to be a general disconnect between state lawmakers and access to healthcare and hospitals. And I think there's probably a bigger disconnect between rural and urban, but here in Madison County, we have the authorities for the healthcare. I don't know if that's typical.
I believe the healthcare authority is tied in with Huntsville Hospital, but I may be wrong. One of the unanticipated, or I hope unanticipated, effects of refusing to expand Medicaid was that, we've had 3 hospitals, I believe, rural hospitals in Alabama, or 4, close recently because Medicaid was not expanded. I think in rural areas, as many as 70% of the babies born, are paid for with Medicaid. I know in nursing homes, a large number of the patients there are on Medicaid, and the state's refusal to expand Medicaid has hurt not only nursing homes but rural hospitals in particular. If you've got a lot of patients that are on Medicaid and can't pay, it's the hospitals that are going to be hurting as well as the patients.
When you look at what's happening with all of these cuts to safety nets that are happening right now, like food banks, SNAP benefits, all of the basically the things that people have come to depend on to get their food and their health care. I know that our city seems to be thinking in terms of economic impact, and rather than the impact on the individuals that may be going hungry, for example. And I'm just wondering if the cities are responsible. Do they consider themselves responsible for the fact if there's not enough food in the food bank to feed the poor, the elders, the seniors, the children who are needing the extra nutrition? Is the city ready to step up to that, to fill the gap?
I don't think they are. I have not seen a large amount of support from cities and counties to to support things like food banks. I think they're relying pretty much strictly on charity. And I don't think it's necessarily being mean-spirited. It's just that Alabama is not a wealthy state, and the tax burden here is extremely low. Let me see, Alabama's tax burden is, if you look at the total of state and local taxes divided by total state income, personal income, the Alabama tax burden is 8.7%. For a typical Alabama person, if you divide, what you pay in state and local taxes versus income, it's 8.7%. Now, just as a comparison, Alaska's debt burden is 6.7%, and New York's is 12.7%. And overall, we're 39th in the nation in terms of tax burden. People complain about taxes, but our taxes are not that much by comparison.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm just wondering what happens after a legislative session like we recently had, because it felt like they spent a lot of time on culture war type issues. And we saw at the end of the session where they didn't get to voting on a lot of local legislation. When
Right.
something like that happens, do the mayors and the county chairs pick up the phone and start screaming? I mean, are they saying anything about it?
Depends on how critical the issue is. Um, Alabama's, and this is a little maybe going too deep in the weeds, but Alabama's legislative session is limited to 30 days a year. And they usually start around the 1st of February and end at the end of May. And the way that works is that the legislative session, Tuesdays and Thursdays are the days they actually are, in session. Wednesday is reserved for committee meetings. Monday and Fridays are typically called travel days, because, like folks up here, you've got a 3-hour drive to Montgomery, and you can't very well, drive down there, spend all day in session, and then try to drive home. So that's how they have a 30-day session, that lasts 4 months. And it has been known to happen that on the last day of the session that they will stop the clock so they can vote on important bills that have to be passed before the session officially ends. But if there are critical bills out there, you need to be lobbying your legislature before the legislature, your legislators. You need to be lobbying your legislators before the legislature meets, so that the bills can be introduced early and acted on, and not, sidelined into a committee.
You just made me think of another question. You said the fiscal year for a municipality is October 1st through September 30th.
Right.
And if there is something that you really feel like needs to be included in the budget, when does the budget cycle start so that you'll have a budget approved and ready to go on October 1st? When should you start showing up asking with your, say, I need this money?
Okay. It depends on the city and the city's schedule, but it should be done early. I would start looking at, if there's a project that you're looking for, I would start, talking to the mayor and the council in February, March timeframe.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of cities also have a mid-year budget adjustment that comes 6 months after October 1st. To see if the revenue is matching the projections, and how are the expenses going? Do we need to make budget adjustments? Most cities will typically have a mid-year budget adjustment.
So I guess the people that are getting elected in August, they're just they're going to be working with the budget that was approved by the previous council and mayor, basically on August 27th, when they have elections, and if their runoff is in September, they're going to be basically going into the fiscal year with a budget that's been set already. And
right. But they can still make changes. But, what you're going to get is a, 200-page budget document. And if you're freshly elected and have not been, you're new to the office, trying to overcome that is going to be, a real tall order.
But if you've elected somebody new and you really got them, you elected them because you really like their positions on a certain thing, then the minute they're elected, you just start pushing for that mid-year correction or getting some new budget allocated. So
yeah. You always want to have the budget approved And remember, the budget is an ordinance. You know, it's a city law. So you have to, it's not just a matter of penciling in different numbers. You have to actually go and get a new budget ordinance passed. It can be done, and it doesn't have to be done at midterm. You can always do it at any time. It's just, if you're coming in fresh and have not been involved in all the budget development, then it's probably going to be a pretty stiff order to change it.
Mm-hmm. All right, Judy?
Do you feel that the absence of newspapers has affected things in city government?
I feel like it has. It used to be that you could find out exactly what was going on by following the write-ups in the Huntsville Times or the Birmingham News or the Mobile Press Register. If you had good reporters, and typically they did, that's all gone away. What coverage is out there now is largely superficial, and that's another good reason for streaming city council meetings. I think that ought to be out there and available to anyone who's interested.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't cost the city that much.
Well, that is something that we feel very strongly about, that local news is critical to democracy and at every level. So that's it would be interesting to see if there's any other sources in communities that are providing the information, but right now it's difficult. And Judy, you had a follow up.
Actually, it's on a different issue. My brain, I'm on fire. I've been having, I know, I mean, this is just so well timed. I've been personally having trouble in Birmingham finding out when meetings were happening. You know, these commission meetings are supposed to be public, but when I get in touch with, number one, this is kind of an interesting thing to note, but the city of Birmingham has scrubbed its website of all of its email addresses. Okay, that's kind of interesting. So it's a little bit harder today to get in touch with everybody. But I got the public information officer and they said, well, okay, so they're posted on a board in City Hall. And that's how you can come and you can find out when the meetings are. And I'm like, so in order to find out when this meeting is, I've got to go downtown and go into City Hall and look at a bulletin board. And that just seems to be a little bit, I don't know, making things harder than they need to be.
Well, it's kind of the go away, girl, you bother me.
Yeah.
Those ought to be posted and easily publicly available. Now, they may be meeting the letter of the law by doing that, but it's obvious. To me, that would be a statement that we don't want public input. If they're hiding their email addresses, that means we don't want public input. And
there's definitely a difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law.
Right. And just speaking of Birmingham, I mentioned how the state is kind of the all-powerful force. Two good examples in Birmingham. Several years ago, Birmingham proposed to raise the minimum wage in Birmingham to $10.10 an hour, and the state immediately squashed that. They passed a law saying, sorry, you can't do it. It completely overrode the city. And also, just very recently, the state dissolved the Birmingham Water and Sewer Board and took it over.
Yeah, and the thing that kind of, to me, shows the segue between the local government and the state government, because when you start looking at the fact that Jefferson County's representation in Montgomery has been shredded into how many different pieces, with people living out into the rural areas that are making decisions for people living in the urban areas, then it really seems to me that it makes it difficult for a municipality to really control its destiny.
Yeah. And speaking to that, I'd like to talk a little bit about how much of the local revenue is taken by the state. And for example, Madison has a 9% sales tax, and Huntsville does too. And 4% of that, and this is true statewide, 4% of that goes to the state of Alabama. 1.5% goes to Madison County, 0.5% to Madison City Schools, 2% to the city general fund, 0.5% to the city debt service paying off bonds, and 0.5% to the Madison Library. And so and you look at property taxes as well, and the the same holds true, that the state takes a big chunk of property taxes that the cities, just don't have. People complain about it, but the state takes a big chunk off the top.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the sales taxes, their primary incomes, because they don't want to raise property taxes.
Right. Like I said, by state law, property taxes have to be approved by the vote of the people. And you have to get approval from the legislature to even conduct a property tax election.
So one thing that, this year with the municipal elections, we're seeing that as a bridge to next year, when all these people that the city needs to work with are going to be on the ballot. So it's all connected. I mean, it's like, if you want to change something in your city, then next year, the people who are currently in the legislature are going to be passing or not passing your local bills, but they'll also be on the ballot in May, and then again in November. So that's, we see, this is all interconnected, and it really requires the voters to be engaged and to understand why it's so important that we elect people who take care of the needs of the people.
Yeah, you need folks that'll listen to you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I believe we've gotten to the end, and I really appreciate Sandy. This has helped us put everything in perspective, and we will, the goal is to have a lot better turnout than we have had in the past. But knowledge is power, and you've helped us understand local government better. And I want to thank everybody that came and attended tonight. And we're recording it. We're going to send it out to everyone so you can listen to it later.
Kathy, if I could just add, city elections are on August 25th, and the last day to register to vote is August the 11th. Mm-hmm. If you want to run for city office, you've got 5 days. Last day to qualify is June 24th. And if you were interested or are interested, you should have started raising money a year ago, because that was when you could start raising money. And it's pretty easy to run for city office. And this is something, where you can contact the city clerk's office. It's pretty easy to do. The qualification fees are low, and get your name out there for sure.
Yeah, we've been telling people, just do it. Even if you don't win, it's like you've gotten yourself out there and you've helped push the dialogue, because right now there's not enough people running for office right now, and it's inexcusable to have elections with only one candidate. And that's got to change. So we're hoping with Vote 411, we can give candidates a platform so they can, if they don't have a lot of money, they can use that to help get their name out. But we're also using it as a tool to inform the voter about what's on their ballot, and then the candidates can use it to say, hey, look, here I am. So it's hopefully a way to offset the fact that some people don't have enough money to buy all the yard signs. And we're nonpartisan, but we're like, people need to run for office. And we don't endorse or oppose candidates, but we sure like to give people a platform to be able to answer questions and get their information out there. So,
well, I appreciate all the great work the league does in trying to get folks involved in registering voters. Y'all do good work.
Thank you. And we appreciate you too. All right. Good night, everybody. And we'll be out there. See everybody out there on a voter services event, trying to get people spun up, show up. Thank you, Sandy.
Enjoyed it.
Thanks.